Her husband moved his mistress into the master bedroom, handed her the chair at the head of the dinner table, and told his wife to sleep in the guest house at the far end of the lawn. His mother pressed her hands together, looked at the mistress sitting in the wife's chair, and said loud enough for every person in that room to hear, "Now, that is what a real woman of this family looks like." Not a single person at that table stood up. Not one of them looked at the wife as she walked out the side door, across the dark grass, toward the small white building where she had been sent to live. Not the husband's brother, who was eating cornbread the wife had baked at dawn. Not the cousins, who were pouring wine the wife had purchased that afternoon. Not the husband himself, who had already turned his back and was whispering something into the mistress's ear that made her laugh. What none of them knew, what Desmond Calloway had never once suspected in 8 years of marriage, was that the woman walking across that lawn in the golden Sunday light owned everything they were sitting in, driving, wearing, and spending. The house, the cars, the company, the land beneath the iron gates, and the magnolia-lined driveway, and every blade of that impossibly green grass. $41 billion in assets, held in trust, structured across 14 states, protected behind legal walls so dense that a team of 50 attorneys would need 2 years just to locate the door. Every document bearing one name, hers, sat behind wrought iron gates on the north side of the city, tucked at the end of a long curving driveway lined with magnolia trees. From the outside, it looked like the kind of home that took generations to build. Tall windows, freshly painted white columns, a lawn so green it almost did not look real. It was the kind of property that made people slow their cars when they drove past, imagining the lives of the people who lived inside those walls. Margot Elliston had spent the morning in the kitchen the way she always did when family gathered. Not because anyone asked her to, because she believed in a home that smelled like warmth, like welcome, like care made visible. She had roasted a chicken so golden it looked like it came from painting. She had prepared glazed root vegetables and a salad with herbs cut fresh from the garden. She had baked cornbread from a recipe her grandmother had written on an index card 40 years ago. The ink faded, but the proportions exact. She had set the long dining table herself, folded the linen napkins into precise triangles, and placed a vase of fresh hydrangeas at the center, white and blue, the colors her grandmother had always preferred. She had done all of this alone. She had done all of this without being thanked. She had done all of this because she still believed, even now, in the ritual of home. She was carrying the last serving dish from the kitchen when the front door opened. Desmond Calloway walked in with Brooke Tavares on his arm, openly, without hesitation, without the slightest trace of apology on his face. Desmond was 39, tall, broad-shouldered, a former college athlete who still carried himself with the heavy entitlement of a man who had been told he was impressive since birth. Strong jaw, easy smile, eyes that held the permanent, slightly glazed expression of a person who had never been truly challenged and had mistaken that absence of challenge for evidence of his own excellence. Brooke was 26, blonde, beautiful in the high-maintenance, camera-ready way of a woman whose appearance was a full-time occupation. She had the kind of confidence that comes not from accomplishment, but from proximity to someone else's power and the assumption that proximity was the same thing as possession. She was wearing a dress Margot recognized immediately. A black silk dress with a draped neckline and delicate cap sleeves. Margot had bought that dress 4 years ago to wear to her grandmother's memorial service. She had chosen it because the cut was modest and the fabric was soft, and it felt appropriate for the occasion of saying goodbye to the woman who had built every important thing inside her. She had hung it in the back of the master bedroom closet afterward, because some clothes carried too much meaning to wear casually. Brooke was wearing it now. It fit her badly, tied across the shoulders, loose at the waist. The careful alteration Margot had done by hand along the hem was visible if you knew where to look. Margot knew where to look. Brooke walked straight to the dining table. She pulled out the chair at the head. Margot's chair. The chair Margot always sat in. The one that faced the window, overlooking the garden her grandmother had helped her design. Brooke sat down, crossed her legs, and rested her chin on her hand as though she had been sitting there for years. Margot stopped in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. She held the serving dish with both hands. She did not move. Desmond's younger brother, Theo, was already seated. 29. He had the particular talent of men who are never quite successful enough to stand on their own, but always positioned close enough to someone else's success to benefit from a shade. He looked up, saw Brooke in Margot's chair, saw Margot standing in the doorway holding the food she had spent the morning preparing, and he said nothing. He reached for the breadbasket, picked up a piece of the cornbread Margot had baked at dawn, and bit into it without looking at her. Then came Lorraine. Lorraine Calloway was Desmond's mother, 64 years old, a small, sharp woman whose opinions occupied far more space than her body ever did. She walked in from the living room wearing a cream blazer and a pearl necklace, and the expression of a woman who had just won an argument she had been having inside her own head for months. She looked at Brooke sitting at the head of the table, and something crossed her face that was not quite a smile, but was nowhere close to disapproval. She clapped her hands together once. The sound was crisp and deeply satisfied in the quiet dining room. Now that, Lorraine said, looking directly at Margot as she said it, is what a real woman of this family looks like. The sentence landed and there was a verdict about Margot, delivered in her own home, at a table she had set with her own hands, surrounded by food she had cooked from her grandmother's recipes, by the mother of a man who had never cooked a single meal, or set a single table, or done a single thing to make that house feel like anything other than a service he was entitled to receive. Margot set the serving dish down on the table. Slowly, carefully, the way you set down something precious, something you intend to come back for. Desmond crossed the room toward her. He lowered his voice, but not enough. In a house full of family, a lowered voice still carries. I've been meaning to talk to you about the guest house. It is all set up now. It is comfortable out there. You will be fine. Margot looked at him. She looked at the face she had married 8 years ago at a courthouse ceremony his mother had refused to attend. She looked at the eyes that had once made her feel seen, and that now looked at her the way a person looks at a piece of furniture they have decided to move to a different room. You want me to sleep in the guest house? Margot said. Not a question. A statement, delivered with the flat precision of a woman confirming a fact she already knew. It is not a big deal, Margot. Brooke needs the space. We need the space. You understand. Margot looked at him for 3 more seconds. She looked past him at the table, at Brooke in her chair, wearing her grandmother's dress, at Theo eating her cornbread, at Lorraine arranging herself in her seat with the settled satisfaction of a woman who believed the correct order of things had finally been established. Then Margot nodded. Once. Just once. She picked up the glass of water sitting at her place setting, the place where she would not be sitting tonight. She walked out of the dining room, through the kitchen, through the side door, across the lawn toward the small white building at the far end of the property. Nobody stopped her. Nobody called her name. Brooke leaned back in the chair and laughed at something Theo said. Lorraine unfolded her napkin with ceremonial precision. Desmond pulled out his own chair, reached for the roasted chicken, and began to serve himself. The family dinner began without the woman who had prepared every dish on that table. And as Margot walked across the lawn in the long golden light of that Sunday evening, she was not crying. She was not broken. She was holding the glass of water in one hand, and with the other, pressed against the fabric of her blouse, she was touching something small and warm and metal, a brass key on a worn leather cord, hanging against her collarbone the way it had hung every single day for 22 years. She pressed it between her fingers as she walked, and something in her face, something a stranger would never catch, but someone who knew her well would never forget, shifted into a calm so deep it looked almost like peace. Because Margot knew something none of them had ever bothered to learn. And tonight was not the end of anything. Tonight or two, the brass key. To understand what happened next, you have to go back. Back to a wooden porch in rural Virginia, where the air smelled like pine needles and red clay, and a 12-year-old girl with bare feet and serious eyes sat beside a woman who carried more wisdom in her quiet hands than most people accumulate in a lifetime of talking. Her name was Pearl Elliston, Margot's grandmother, a retired schoolteacher who had raised 3 children on a single income after burying her husband at 41. A woman who bought land when people told her she could not afford it, who built savings when people said she had nothing to save, who did all of it without making a single announcement, without asking a single permission, and without letting a single person see her hand until she was ready to show it. She sat in her rocking chair that summer evening, sorting coins into a tin jar the way she did every Friday. and she said to young Margot, "The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody thinks is watching. Remember that, baby girl." Margot filed it away the way children file away things that feel important before they fully understand why. Over the years that followed, she watched her grandmother. She watched how Pearl moved through the world. Quiet but unignorable. Gentle but immovable. She watched how Pearl never argued with people who underestimated her. She simply let them. And then she let the results speak. She watched how the old woman could sit across from a man twice her size who was talking loud and wrong about something. And Pearl would just nod and smile and say, "Is that right?" And 2 months later, that same man would be coming to Pearl asking for advice about the exact thing he had been so wrong about. And Pearl would give it graciously. Because she did not need to win the argument to win the outcome. A neighbor named Mrs. Langford lost everything in a bad business deal when Margot was 14. Signed paper she did not fully read. Trusted a man who seemed trustworthy. Woke up one morning to find the ground had shifted beneath her. Margot watched what that loss did to a woman. It did not just take the money. It took something deeper. Some inner certainty about her own judgment that Mrs. Langford spent years trying to recover. Margot told herself at 14 years old, sitting on a Virginia porch with red clay beneath her feet, that she would never sign anything she did not fully understand. She would never let her name appear on a document whose depth she had not personally measured. She would never give another human being the ability to pull a floor out from under her. Before she left for college on a full academic scholarship, Pearl called her to the porch one last time. She reached into the pocket of her house dress and pulled out a small brass key on a worn leather cord. The key was old, smooth, the kind of warm that metal gets when it has been held by loving hands for a very long time. Pearl pressed into Margot's palm and said, "This key does not open anything yet, but everything you build will need a key someday. Keep it close, and don't ever let them see it coming." Margot put the cord around her neck that same evening. She had not taken off since. Not when she graduated law school at the top of her class. Not when she completed a second degree in real estate finance. Not when she founded Elliston Ventures from a studio apartment and a secondhand laptop at 24, investing every dollar she had. Not when the company grew, year by year, deal by deal, into a holding empire that stretched across 14 states and $41 billion in assets. Hotels, commercial real estate, development land, infrastructure projects, investment portfolios so layered and so deep that the financial press had spent years trying to identify the person behind the initials and had never succeeded. Not once. And not when she met Desmond Calloway at a charity event 8 years ago and fell for his confidence and his laughter and the way he looked at her like she was the most extraordinary thing in the room. She had wanted what her grandmother never got the chance to have again after losing her husband. A partner, a home, a life, not the company, not the empire, just her. She had hidden the empire. She had lived on a modest salary from a nonprofit literacy foundation she funded anonymously. She had driven a sensible car. She had dressed simply. She had cooked dinners and folded laundry and managed every detail of the household, while the man she married took credit for the life she had quietly built around him. The estate on Magnolia Drive. Desmond believed his mortgage had been approved 5 years ago. It had not. He was over-leveraged, drowning in hidden debt from bad investments he had concealed from Margot. She had intervened silently. An Elliston subsidiary purchased the property in cash for $6.8 million. A fictitious leasing company was created through a proxy firm, disguised as a rent-to-own mortgage arrangement that sent Desmond a monthly statement that looked exactly like a mortgage payment confirmation. He never questioned it. He never read the fine print. He never asked why the interest rate was so favorable or why the bank's name did not match any major institution. Because Desmond Calloway had never in his life read the fine print on anything. The cars, the black Range Rover and the silver Mercedes sedan that Desmond drove to every meeting and every dinner and every social occasion where he needed to look like a man of substance. Both registered under Elliston Fleet Management LLC. The company. Desmond introduced himself at every party and every networking event as the founder of Callaway Capital Partners. He handed out business cards. He shook hands with conviction. He referenced the firm in every conversation about his success. What Desmond did not know, what he had never once been curious enough to investigate, was that Callaway Capital Partners was a subsidiary that had always operated under Elliston Ventures' silent authorization. His name on the letterhead had always been exactly what Margot had designed it to be: a front, a courtesy, a title with no foundation underneath it. Margot had built all of this around him, the way an architect builds walls around open air. From the outside, it looked solid. From the inside, it felt real. But the structure had always belonged to the architect. She had done this not out of manipulation, but out of love. A quiet, perhaps foolish, deeply earnest love that believed if she gave him the appearance of success, the feeling of self-worth, the scaffolding of a life he could be proud of, perhaps he would grow into the man she had hoped he could be. Perhaps the scaffolding would become real. Perhaps the appearance would eventually become substance. It never did. The brass key had been under her collar at their wedding. It had been under her collar through 8 years of marriage. It had been under her collar on the Sunday evening when Desmond walked Brooke Tavares through the front door of a house that had always, from the first signature, three small cruelties. The weeks that followed were weeks of accumulation. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that does damage the way water damages a foundation. Slowly, invisibly, until the walls give. Brooke moved deeper into the main house with every passing day. She redecorated the master bedroom first. She took down the framed photographs of Margot and Desmond's early years together. The ones from their trip to Savannah. The one from the afternoon they adopted the old dog from the shelter. The black and white one Margot had loved most, taken on the courthouse steps the day they married. Both of them laughing at something neither could remember afterward. Brooke replaced them with prints she ordered online. Abstract shapes in gold frames. The kind of art that costs very little and says even less. She rearranged the living room furniture. She threw away things without asking. A hand-knitted blanket Pearl had made before she passed. A set of ceramic bowls Margot had brought back from trip to Portugal. Each one slightly different. Each one chosen because it was imperfect in a way that felt honest. A stack of books with notes in the margins. Margot's handwriting. Small, careful observations in pencil that recorded the evolution of a mind across 20 years of reading. Brooke threw them into garbage bags and set them at the curb on a Tuesday morning. She did it cheerfully, the way people do things when they believe they are building rather than destroying. One evening, Brooke found the brass keys leather cord hanging on a hook in the bathroom, where Margot had left it during a shower weeks earlier. Margot had already moved to the guest house by then, but a few of her things remained scattered through the main house like evidence of a previous life. Brooke held the cord up between two fingers and showed it to Desmond and Theo, who were drinking bourbon at the kitchen counter. "What is this?" Brooke said. She was laughing already, the way people laugh before they have even identified what is funny because the intention to mock has already been decided. A key to what? The storage unit she grew up in. Theo snorted. Desmond smiled, not a full laugh, but a smile that permitted the joke, that endorsed it, that said this was acceptable in his home. "That thing," Desmond said, swirling his glass. "She has worn that thing every day since I met her. I asked her once what it opened. She said everything. I said, 'Baby, it does not even open the mailbox.'" Theo laughed. Brooke laughed. Desmond drank. Nobody in that kitchen understood that the key they were laughing at had been pressed into a 12-year-old girl's hand by a woman who had survived more than all three of them combined. Nobody understood that it was not a key to a lock. It was a key to a principle, to a way of moving through the world that none of them had the depth to recognize. Margot was in the guest house. She could not hear the laughter, but she did not need to hear it. She had stopped needing their opinions a long time ago. Every night, after the lights in the main house went dark, Margot sat at the small desk in the corner of the guest house. A desk she had chosen because it had good light and faced east. She opened her encrypted laptop and reviewed the daily briefing Warren Aldrich sent her at 11 each night. Warren was Margot's chief counsel and the head of the real estate consortium that served as Elliston Ventures' public-facing entity. 61 years old. Harvard Law. One of the most respected figures in Southern real estate development. He had worked with Margot for 9 years, and he was, in his own words, quietly terrified of how smart she was. The briefings were precise. Property status: Magnolia Drive primary residence. Purchased 2019 by Elliston Holdings Trust for $6.8 million. Current assessed value $11.2 million. No name other than Margot Elliston on any recorded deed or trust document. Vehicle status. Two vehicles registered under Elliston Fleet Management LLC. Repossession authorization drafted and pre-signed. Awaiting execution order. Subsidiary status. Callaway Capital Partners. Operating under revocable license from Elliston Ventures. License revocation documents prepared. Attempted asset transfers. Three documents signed by Desmond Callaway and Theodore Callaway, authorizing movement of fund from Elliston subsidiary accounts totaling $4.7 million. All three documents executed using authorization codes that expired 14 months ago, legally invalid. Reversal filings completed. Additional item. Brooke Tavares' personal bank account received $87,000 in transfers from Callaway Capital operating funds over the previous 6 weeks, constituting unauthorized use of corporate assets. Documentation preserved for potential civil action. Lorraine Callaway residence. Property at 412 Dunmore Lane. Purchased by Elliston Ventures in 2017. Property taxes paid by Elliston for 12 consecutive years. Sale listing authorization prepared. Awaiting execution order. Margot read each item. She made notes in a leather-bound notebook, in handwriting so small and precise it looked like code. She closed the laptop. She looked at the guest house walls she had designed, in a space she had built, on land she had purchased years before Desmond ever proposed. Then she pressed the brass key against her collarbone and whispered, so quietly that only the empty room could hear. Not yet, but soon. Meanwhile, Lorraine worked the family. She called cousins. She had conversations at church. She told anyone who would listen that she had always known Margot was not right for Desmond. She said her son had sacrificed years trying to carry a woman who could not meet him at his level. She said Brooke was the kind of woman he deserved. Warm, beautiful, present. The narrative moved through the extended family like smoke through a cracked window, quiet enough that nobody could point to its source, thick enough that it changed everything. One Thursday morning, a cousin named Janelle approached Margot in the parking lot of a grocery store. Janelle was genuinely kind. Her face held the specific discomfort of someone delivering bad news they did not ask to carry. She touched Margot's elbow gently. Look, Margot, people are talking. They're saying you were out there in that guest house like you lost everything, like you have nothing left. Why don't you just go start fresh somewhere? Get away from all of this. Margot looked at her for a moment, considered her, then said, gently and without any edge at all, I'm exactly where I need to be, Janelle. Janelle searched Margot's face for the distress she expected to find. She found nothing that looked like distress. She walked away confused. What Janelle could not have known, what none of them knew, was that Margot's stillness was not the stillness of a woman defeated. It was something else entirely. There's a certain kind of person who has built something so solid, so deep, so quietly reinforced over so many years that when someone tries to take it from them, the attempt does not feel like destruction. It feels almost like watching someone walk up to a mountain and try to push it with their hands. She was not afraid of any of them. She was simply waiting. The way a woman waits who has already decided how the story. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in the third week. Desmond was hosting a dinner party at the main house for business associates, city officials, a developer from Charlotte he had been trying to impress for months. Brooke wore emerald gown, candles on every surface. The house looked beautiful in a way that was a direct and precise imitation of how Margot had always kept it. Every detail Brooke had arranged was borrowed from Margot's eye, from Margot's taste, from the invisible labor of a woman who had spent years making a home feel like something worth entering. Margot was not invited. She sat in the guest house with a book she was not reading, watching warm light pour from the windows of the main house across the dark lawn. She could hear faint music, low laughter, the muffled sound of a party in a house she had purchased with money she earned before the man hosting it ever knew her name. Around 9 o'clock, Desmond stepped outside to take a phone call. He stood on the back patio, leaning against the railing. He did not see Margot sitting in the darkness of the guest house porch, 15 feet away and perfectly still. He did not know she could hear him. His voice carried across the quiet yard, and every word arrived at her ears clean and clear. Yeah, yeah, she is still out there in the guest house. Look, she's got nothing, man. She never had anything. Whatever she thought she brought to this, it was me. It was always me. A pause. The other person responding. Nah, I'm serious. Everything you see, this house, the cars, the company, I built all of that. I made that woman. She was nothing before me, and she will be nothing after. Another pause. Desmond laughed, low and easy. The laugh of a man who has convinced himself so completely of his own story that the truth could walk up and shake his hand, and he would not recognize it. Honestly, she should be thanking me. I gave her the best years of her life. And all she gave me was that sad little brass key around her neck like it means something. He laughed again and went back inside. Margot sat in the dark and felt something tighten in her jaw. One tear formed in the corner of her right eye. She pressed the heel of her hand to her cheek, held it there for 3 full seconds. Then she took her hand away and the tear was gone. She stood up. She went inside the guest house. She went to the wooden dresser in the corner. She opened the bottom drawer. She moved aside the folded scarf and the worn leather Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. Beneath them sat a thick sealed folder. She carried it to the desk. She sat down. She opened the folder. Pages and pages. Property deeds. Holding company registrations. LLC structures. Trust documents. Investment portfolio statements. Real estate development agreements across Atlanta, Houston, Memphis, Charlotte, Birmingham, New Orleans, Nashville, Richmond, and 5 more cities. Hotel acquisitions. Commercial land banks. Infrastructure development contracts with 3 state governments. The kind of wealth that does not announce itself at dinner parties. The kind that simply exists, day after day, quietly compounding, protected behind legal walls that would take an army of attorneys and years of litigation to even begin to untangle. $41 billion. Every document bearing one name. Hers. She looked at the pages for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and made one call. Warren, it is time. She could hear the smile on his voice when he replied. I will have everything ready by Saturday. The consortium gala. Full guest list. Every name that matters. Good. Margot. Yes. It has been an honor watching you wait. She closed the folder. She placed it on the desk. She looked at the guest house walls, and something settled in her chest that felt like the closing of a door. Not a painful closing, a final one. That was the night Margot stopped grieving. The gala was held on a Saturday evening in late October at a glass and steel event center in downtown Atlanta that occupied an entire city block. Every light in that building was on. Every significant name in Southern real estate was on a guest list. City council members, state legislators, developers, investors, fund managers. The kind of room where business gets done not in boardrooms, but in the spaces between handshakes and the quiet seconds after introductions. The event was hosted by the Aldrich Consortium, one of those groups whose name appears on building signage and development permits and city planning documents across the metro area. The kind of group that shapes skylines. What the general public did not know, what the business press had never confirmed, what Desmond certainly did not know, was that the Aldrich Consortium's primary financial architect, the silent force behind its most significant projects over the past decade, was Elliston Ventures. Desmond had received his invitation through a connection Theo had made. He arrived in a tailored navy suit. The suit was rented. The cufflinks were borrowed from Theo. The confidence was entirely his own and entirely unearned. He had Brooke on his arm. She wore a gold dress that caught the light whenever she moved, and she moved frequently, orbiting the room the way a satellite orbits something it believes it belongs to. Desmond worked the room. Big handshake. Bigger smile. The name Callaway Capital Partners on his lips before the second sentence of every conversation. He was performing. He was in his element. And to anyone watching who did not know what was about to happen, he looked like exactly what he believed himself to be. At 9:15, the double doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. The first thing people noticed was the way the air in the room seemed to reorganize itself around the woman who walked through them. Not because the room went instantly silent. It did not. But because Margot Elliston had the kind of presence that creates its own weather. She wore a floor-length gown in deep burgundy, the color of authority made fabric. Her hair was natural and full, the way she wore it when she was not performing for anyone, when she was simply being what she was. Her posture was straight and unhurried, and carried the specific gravity of someone who has spent a very long time preparing for a single moment and has no intention of rushing it. And at the center of her neckline, Resting visibly against her collarbone for the first time in 8 years, hung the brass key on its worn leather cord. Polished, deliberately placed, no longer hidden under a collar, no longer tucked away, like a period at the end of a very long, very patient sentence. Warren Aldrich was across the room when she entered. He stopped his conversation mid-sentence. He crossed the floor directly toward her. He took both her hands in the way you take the hands of someone you genuinely admire, and he said, loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear clearly, Ms. Elliston, welcome. Everything is ready for your announcement. Heads turned. Desmond was 30 feet away, shaking hands with a city council member. He heard the name. He turned. He saw Margot across the room. He saw Warren's posture, deferential, warm, the posture of a man addressing someone above him in every hierarchy that mattered. He saw the room begin to orient toward her, the way a room orients toward someone it recognizes as significant. Something crossed Desmond's face. The first crack in a very confident performance. His grip on the council member's hand loosened. His smile did not disappear, but it stopped reaching his eyes. Brooke tightened her fingers on his arm. She felt the shift too. She felt it, but she did not yet understand it. Warren escorted Margot to the podium at the front of the ballroom. She stepped behind it without holding the sides. The way people stand when they do not need anything to hold on to. She waited for the room to settle. It settled quickly. These are people who knew how to read a moment. She did not begin with pleasantries. She did not thank anyone for the invitation. She said, clearly and without performance, my name is Margot Elliston. I am the sole founder and owner of Elliston Ventures. She paused. Let the name land. Watch the recognition move across the room from face to face like a wave crossing still water. Over the past 17 years, Elliston Ventures has developed or acquired assets across 14 states, with a current portfolio value of approximately $41 billion. Many of you in this room have done business with us without knowing my name. That was intentional. Tonight, I would like that to change. The room was completely still. 400 people, and not a single glass was raised, not a single phone was checked, not a single whispered conversation continued. I would like to begin by clarifying a few specific matters. She did not look at Desmond. She looked at the room. The estate on Magnolia Drive, the one with the white columns and the guest house at the far end of the lawn, was purchased by an Elliston subsidiary in 2019 for $6.8 million. It has never carried any name but mine on any deed, trust, or recorded document. She let the sentence breathe. The black Range Rover and the silver Mercedes sedan currently parked in the driveway of that estate are registered under Elliston Fleet Management LLC. They will be collected Monday morning. Another breath. The company known as Callaway Capital Partners, the firm some of you may have encountered at events like this one, operates as a licensed subsidiary of Elliston Ventures. The individual whose name appears on its letterhead holds no ownership stake, no equity position, and no legal authority over any of its assets. The operating license has been revoked as of this evening. She paused. The room had passed silence and entered something deeper, something that felt like the collective recalibration of every assumption 400 people had ever made. Over the past 3 weeks, documents were signed attempting to transfer $4.7 million from Elliston subsidiary accounts. Those documents were executed using authorization codes that expired 14 months ago. They are legally null. My attorneys have already reversed every transaction and filed the appropriate protections. Now she looked at Desmond. Just once. Just for a moment. Before I continue, I would like this room to hear something. She reached into the small clutch she carried and produced her phone. She tapped the screen once. Desmond's voice filled the ballroom through the sound system Warren had prepared. Clear and unmistakable. She's got nothing, man. She never had anything. I made that woman. She was nothing before me. The recording played for 12 seconds. 12 seconds that contained a man's an understanding so wrong that it would have been funny if it were not also the reason a woman who owned $41 billion had spent 3 weeks sleeping in a guest house on her own property. Then another voice. Lorraine's, recorded from a speakerphone conversation Margot's attorney had preserved. She has nothing left, that girl. She never had anything to begin with. My son carried her for 8 years, and this is what he gets. 7 seconds of Lorraine. Then a third recording. Brooke and Theo, captured on the home security system Margot had installed and maintained. Sitting at the kitchen counter, discussing the asset transfer documents. Theo saying, "Just sign them fast before she figures out something is happening." Brooke replying, "She will not figure out anything. She does not even understand how money works." The recordings ended. The room did not move. Margot looked at the audience. She did not look angry. Anger would have required her to care what the people in those recordings thought of her. She looked at them with something quieter. Something that, if Desmond was honest with himself in the years that followed, he would have to call what it actually was. Pity. The woman they described, Margot said, the one with nothing, the one who was made by someone else, the one who does not understand how money works, is the woman who built the company whose capital funded this event center, whose investments employ 4,000 people in this city, and whose name sits behind half the development permits issued in this metro area in the last decade. She let the sentence settle. "I did not come here tonight to humiliate anyone. I came to correct a record and to introduce myself properly for the first time." She paused, touched a brass key at her collarbone. "My grandmother gave me this key when I was 17 years old. She told me it did not open anything yet. She told me to keep it close. And she told me, don't ever let them see it coming." She looked at the room one final time. They did not see it coming. She stepped away from the podium. Warren handed her a glass of water. She took it. She turned her back on the room and did not turn around again. Behind her, 400 people began to breathe again. Desmond stood in the center of the most important room in Atlanta real estate and felt the floor of the identity he had spent 8 years performing begin to separate from anything solid underneath it. Brooke's champagne glass was frozen in her hand, raised halfway to lips that had stopped moving. Her eyes were wide, not with sadness, not with guilt, with the specific, clarifying terror of a person who has just realized they placed their entire bet on the wrong number. She turned to Desmond. Her voice came out sharp and loud in the quiet room. "You told me she was nothing. You told me you built all of this. I left my apartment for you. I moved into her house. I wore her clothes. You told me she was nobody." Desmond did not respond. He could not. "You ruined my life," Brooke said. "You do not even own the suit you are standing in." She set the champagne glass on the nearest table, turned, and walked toward the exit. Her gold dress caught the light one last time. Nobody followed her. Nobody called her name. She walked through the doors and disappeared from this story completely. Theo, somewhere in the back of the room, felt his phone vibrating over and over in his pocket. Messages, calls. People who had seen the live stream, one of the attendees, had opened on social media. He looked at his phone screen, and the color drained from his face so completely that a woman standing next to him asked if he needed medical attention. Lorraine was at home. She had been watching television. A family member called and told her to find a live stream. She found it in time to hear the recordings of her own voice played for 400 people and an unknown number watching online. The phone stayed at her ear long after the call ended. Her hand was shaking, not from anger, from something she was not accustomed to feeling. The sudden, sickening recognition that she had been completely, catastrophically. That is how long it took for everything Desmond Calloway had been standing on to reveal itself as air. Monday morning, 8 o'clock, a flatbed tow truck pulled through the iron gates of the Magnolia Drive estate. A second truck followed. The drivers had paperwork. The paperwork was immaculate. The black Range Rover was loaded onto the first truck, the silver Mercedes onto the second. A neighbor saw it happen, then another neighbor. By Monday afternoon, 14 people had mentioned it to other people. Monday evening, Callaway Capital Partners' office suite in Midtown Atlanta received a courier delivery. Inside the envelope was a formal notice of subsidiary license revocation, signed by the Elliston Ventures Board of Directors. Effective immediately, all assets frozen, all operating accounts suspended, all employees reassigned to Elliston Direct Management. Desmond's name was removed from the letterhead, the website, and the building directory before midnight. Tuesday, the property manager for Magnolia Drive arrived at the estate carrying an eviction notice. Margot had offered a 30-day courtesy period, which was more than the law required, given that Desmond's name did not appear on any document related to the property. Desmond read the notice 3 times, then a fourth. Then he set it on the kitchen counter, Brooke's kitchen counter with the backsplash Brooke had chosen, and he sat down in a chair and did not get up for a very long time. Tuesday evening, A certified letter arrived at 412 Dunmore Lane, the home Lorraine Calloway had been living in for 12 years. The home Desmond had assured her was paid off and secure under his name. The letter informed her that the property was held by an Elliston Venture subsidiary and would be listed for sale within 90 days. Lorraine called Desmond. His phone rang 8 times and went to voicemail. She called Theo. Theo said he cannot talk right now. He said this quickly and hung up. She sat in the house she had hosted family dinners in for 12 years. She looked at the walls. She thought about the Sunday she had looked at Margot in that dining room, looked her directly in the eyes, and said what a real woman of this family looks like. She thought about how satisfied she had felt saying those words, how certain she had been that she was right. And for the first time in her adult life, Lorraine Calloway felt something she was not accustomed to feeling. Small. Genuinely. Irreversibly small. Theo's commercial development deal in Midtown collapsed within a week. The mixed-use residential and retail project he had been pitching to an investment fund for 2 years. What Theo had never thought to ask was that the fund's lead capital source was an Elliston portfolio account. When the account was reorganized, the fund's commitment to Theo's project was quietly withdrawn. A brief letter. The fund's direction had changed. Theo called the contact number 3 times. Nobody answered. Brooke attempted to reach Margot once, through a mutual contact. A personal appeal. An explanation. An apology of sorts. Margot's assistant, a young woman named Celeste who had worked for Elliston for 5 years, and who was entirely devoted to her employer, sent back a reply. 3 words. She is unavailable. Permanently. Brooke left Atlanta before the month ended. Nobody in Desmond's circle ever mentioned her name again. She became simply an absence where a presence used to be. A gold dress that caught the light and then was gone. Desmond ended up in a rented apartment in a part of the city he had previously driven through with the windows up. The company whose name he had been using, the title, the letterhead, the identity, had been reorganized under entirely new management. His role, such as it had been, ceased to exist. He applied for 2 positions over the following months, listing the professional experience he had accumulated under Margot's infrastructure. Both applications stalled when the background of the company on his resume was examined more closely. His references had been Margot's contacts. His accomplishments had been Margot's deals. His reputation had been Margot's architecture. Without the scaffolding, there was nothing to stand on. He called Margot once. She did not answer. He sent a message once. She did not reply. He sat in the rented apartment and looked at the ceiling. And finally, for the first time in their entire marriage, he began the long and uncomfortable process of understanding who Margot Elliston had actually been. He thought back over 8 years. The way she was always calm. The way she always seemed to know things he did not know she knew. The way she never boasted about money or holdings or deals the way he did constantly. The way she wore that brass key every day like a quiet reminder to herself that she had never needed him. Not even for a moment. Not even once. He had called her simple. He had called her without ambition. He had stood on his own back patio, believing himself unheard, and told someone on the phone that he had made her. He pressed his eyes closed in the rented apartment. The sentence came back to him. I made that woman. He turned it over, looked at it from every angle, felt the full weight of how completely wrong a name and a life with. He had not made her. She had arrived already made, long before he ever walked into that charity event and smiled at her across the room. She had been made in Virginia, on a wooden porch, by a grandmother with a tin jar and a brass key and more wisdom in her quiet hands, and Desmond Calloway had managed her 7. The porch. 6 months later, Margot drove 9 hours from Atlanta to a stretch of county road in rural Virginia she had not driven in almost 4 years. She drove alone. She did not call ahead. The land knew her. That was enough. The old property had been empty since Grandma Pearl passed. Margot had kept the taxes paid, the deed in order, the grass cut by a local man she paid twice a year. She had been waiting until she was ready, until she had something whole to bring back to a place that had given her everything important she had ever carried. She had learned long ago that there is a difference between going home because you have nowhere else to go and going home because you have become the person you needed to be to deserve it. She had not been ready until now, until the thing she had been quietly building was no longer something she had to hide, until she could walk up that dirt road as the full, visible, unbothered version of herself, without anyone in the world having a claim on what she was or was not. She had bought back the surrounding land over the years, quietly through an Elliston subsidiary. The creek at the back of the property that used to flood the lower fields had been redirected with proper grading. The porch had been restored in the fall. During the weeks, she was still sleeping in the guest house, because Margot had never stopped building, just because the people around her were trying to tear things down. She had commissioned the work without seeing it in person, trusting the plan she had drawn up with a contractor she trusted. She pulled up the long dirt road and stepped out of the car into the kind of quiet that cities only dream about. Pine trees, red clay, the smell of earth after rain. The sky was enormous out here, the way it is only in places where buildings do not interrupt it. She stood beside the car and breathed, took it all in, let the quiet settle on her shoulders the way it used to when she was a girl, and this land was the entire world she knew. The porch was exactly as she had asked for it. Wide, painted the same pale gray it had been when she was a child. The rocking chair had been sourced from an antique dealer in Charlottesville, because the original had finally given up after all those years. She sat in the rocking chair. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she was 12 years old again, and the evening was warm, and someone who loved her was telling her the truth about the world. She opened her eyes when she heard footsteps. Her sister's daughter came running across the yard. The girl was 12 years old, all legs and curiosity, a face that reminded Margot of herself at that age in a way that was almost difficult to look at directly. Those same serious eyes, that same quiet attention to everything. The girl ran up the porch steps and stood in front of Margot, slightly out of breath, her eyes fixed on something at Margot's neckline. "Aunt Margot," she said, "what is that key for?" Margot looked down at it. She had been looking at it differently since the gala, not with the weight of everything it had survived, but with something lighter, something closer to gratitude. She looked at her niece's serious face, and she felt Grandma Pearl, so close it was as if she were standing just behind the rocking chair, one hand resting gently on the wood. "Everything, baby," Margot said. "Everything I ever needed." Then Margot reached in her pocket and took out a second key. Smaller, new brass, still bright, on a leather cord identical to hers. She had it made 3 weeks ago. She had been carrying it since, waiting for this moment. She placed it in the girl's open palm. "This one does not open anything yet," Margot said, "but one day it will. And when it does, remember what your great-grandmother told me." The girl looked at the key in her hand with an expression of such solemn importance that it made Margot's chest ache. What did she say? Margot smiled. The first full, unguarded smile she had allowed herself in a very long time. Don't ever let them see it coming. The evening came in from the east, warm and slow, the way evenings arrive in Virginia when there is nowhere to be and nothing left to prove. Somewhere in Atlanta, a man was learning what it means to stand on ground that was never his. Somewhere else, an old woman was sitting in a house that had never really been her son's, reading a 90-day notice for the third time. And somewhere in Virginia, on a porch her grandmother used to sit on, a woman who had built an empire in silence was rocking in a chair she had chosen herself, holding a key to everything she had ever made, listening to the pine trees, and finally, for the first time and longer than she could remember, feeling the full, unhurried weight of what it means to have been right all along. She had not raised her voice. Not once. She had not made a scene. She had not begged for a seat at a table she had purchased with her own money and set with her own hands. She had not chased them, or confronted them in grocery stores, or called cousins to spread her version of the story, or shown up at doors demanding explanations. She had given none of them the pleasure of watching her come apart, because she understood. And this was the thing Grandma Pearl had spent years trying to teach. The thing that takes the longest to really live inside of. Dignity is not something other people give you permission to have. It is something you protect from the inside. Something you carry so deep within yourself that no one can reach it, no matter what they do to the outside. Real power does not announce itself. It does not need to. It builds. It waits. It structures and protects and compounds in silence, year after year, behind walls that the careless never think to look for. And when it finally decides to speak, not with anger, not with bitterness, not with any of the performances people expect from someone who's been wronged, but simply by standing up and saying its own name in a room full of people who suddenly understand what that name means. There is nothing left to say. Nothing at all. If this story stayed with you, if something about that brass key, or that porch, or that quiet walk across the lawn made you feel something you did not subscribe, and turn on notifications. We tell stories here about people who were underestimated, people who were counted out, and the moments when the truth finally, quietly, speaks for itself. See you in the next one.